What if I told you that you've been receiving messages from God your entire life, but you've been missing them because you don't know the language He uses? Every synchronicity, every coincidence, every moment when something just felt right, these aren't accidents. Ibn-Arabi spent his life decoding the secret language that God uses to communicate with us. And what he discovered will change how you see everything. But first, let me ask you something. Have you ever had one of those moments where you were thinking about someone, and then they called you? Or you needed guidance about a decision, and then you heard exactly the right words in a conversation, a song, or even an overheard comment? Or you kept seeing the same number everywhere, or the same symbol, or meeting people with the same name? Most people dismiss these experiences as coincidences, random events in a chaotic universe. But Ibn-Arabi saw something else entirely. He saw God speaking, not in some mystical faraway sense, but as immediate and present as the words you're hearing right now. 800 years ago, Ibn-Arabi made a revolutionary discovery. He realized that the entire universe is structured as a language, a vast, complex system of divine communication, where every event, every encounter, every circumstance is a word in God's ongoing conversation with creation. He called this language of signs, lugat alayat. Not just the signs mentioned in holy books, but the signs that surround you every moment. The person who smiles at you in the grocery store. The book that falls open to exactly the page you need. The bird that lands on your windowsill during a moment of grief. The sudden inspiration that solves a problem you've been struggling with. According to Ibn-Arabi, these aren't separate from divine revelation. They are divine revelation. God doesn't only speak through prophets and scriptures. God speaks through existence itself. Every moment of your experience is a word in an infinite divine sentence that has been unfolding since the beginning of time. But here's the problem. We've forgotten how to read this language. We've become spiritually illiterate. It's as if we've been given love letters written in a beautiful script, but we can't read the alphabet, so we use them as scrap paper. Ibn-Arabi spent decades learning to read this divine alphabet fluently. And what he discovered is that God never stops communicating with us. Every person you meet is a messenger, whether they know it or not. Every circumstance you face is a teaching, whether you recognize it or not. Every thought that arises, every feeling that moves through you, every dream that visits you in sleep, all of it is divine speech. This might sound overwhelming or hard to believe, but Ibn-Arabi taught that learning this language is actually the most natural thing in the world, because you are not separate from this divine communication system. You are part of it. You are both a receiver of divine messages and a vehicle through which God sends messages to others. The key to learning this language is understanding what Ibn-Arabi called correspondences, the way that outer events correspond to inner spiritual states, and the way that divine qualities express themselves through apparently ordinary circumstances. For example, if you've been feeling spiritually dry and disconnected, and then you encounter flowing water, whether it's rain, a river, or even just noticing your faucet dripping, Ibn-Arabi would say this is not coincidence. Water is the divine quality of mercy and spiritual nourishment, manifesting in your experience precisely when you need to remember that these qualities are available to you. Or if you've been struggling with a difficult decision, and then you see two paths diverging in the woods, or two roads meeting at an intersection, or even two items side by side in a store, the divine is speaking to you about the nature of choice, about the importance of this decision, about trust in divine guidance. This isn't magical thinking or reading meaning into random events. Ibn-Arabi taught that everything is interconnected at the deepest level, because everything is expressions of the same divine consciousness. When your inner state aligns with outer circumstances in meaningful ways, you're witnessing the fundamental unity that underlies apparent multiplicity. But learning to read this language requires what Ibn-Arabi called presence, a quality of attention that is simultaneously very focused and very open. Focused enough to notice the details of your experience, and open enough to receive their deeper significance without forcing interpretations. Most of us live in a state of spiritual distraction. We're so caught up in our mental commentary about experience that we miss the experience itself. We're so busy interpreting life through our concepts and memories and projections that we miss the fresh communication that is always being offered in this moment, like Ibn-Arabi taught. Specific practices for developing this quality of presence and learning to read divine signs with accuracy rather than projection. The first practice is what he called fana fil waqt, disappearing into the present moment. This means letting go of your mental commentary about what's happening and instead becoming completely available to what is happening. When you stop thinking about the experience and start receiving the experience directly, you begin to hear what it's actually saying. The second practice is learning to distinguish between signs that come from divine communication and signs that come from your own psychological projections. The difference, according to Ibn-Arabi, is that true divine signs always lead you toward greater love, greater wisdom, greater service to others. Signs that come from ego or psychological wishful thinking usually lead toward self-importance, spiritual bypassing, or using spirituality to avoid responsibility. The third practice is developing what he called adab, the proper etiquette for receiving divine communication. This means approaching signs with humility, gratitude, and a willingness to be transformed by what you receive. It means asking, what is this trying to teach me? Rather than, how can I use this to get what I want? When you begin to practice reading this divine language, Ibn Arabi promised that your entire relationship with reality transforms. Instead of feeling isolated in a random, meaningless universe, you discover that you're in constant, intimate dialogue with divine intelligence. Instead of feeling like you have to figure everything out on your own, you realize that guidance is always available if you know how to listen for it. This doesn't mean that life becomes easier, or that you always get what you want, but it does mean that life becomes profoundly meaningful. Every challenge becomes a teaching. Every difficulty becomes an invitation to develop qualities you didn't know you had. Every loss becomes an opportunity to discover what cannot be lost. Ibn Arabi taught that there are different levels of fluency in this divine language. At the beginning level, you start to notice obvious synchronicities and meaningful coincidences. You begin to pay attention to dreams, to repeated symbols, to the timing of events in your life. At the intermediate level, you start to understand that every person who enters your life is bringing you exactly what you need for your spiritual development, even when what they bring is challenging or uncomfortable. You begin to see that circumstances are not happening to you randomly, but are arising as perfect opportunities for you to embody divine qualities like patience, compassion, courage, surrender. At the advanced level, you realize that you yourself are a sign, a word in God's language, a message that divine consciousness is sending to the world through your unique presence and actions. You begin to live with the awareness that everything you say and do is potentially a form of divine communication to others, whether you realize it or not. This is what Ibn Arabi meant when he said that the awakened person becomes a speaking Quran, not because they quote scripture, but because their entire life becomes a living expression of divine communication. But perhaps the most profound level of reading this divine language is when you realize that the one who reads the signs and the one who sends the signs are actually the same consciousness. The divine intelligence that is communicating through circumstances is the same intelligence that is understanding those circumstances through your awareness. At this level, Ibn Arabi taught, you realize that existence itself is God's way of talking to himself. Every experience you have is divine consciousness exploring its own infinite creativity and recognizing its own unlimited nature through the temporary form of your individual perspective. This understanding transforms prayer, meditation, and spiritual practice completely. Instead of trying to communicate with God as if God were somewhere else, you realize that your entire life is already a form of divine communication. Your joys are God celebrating. Your sorrows are God learning compassion. Your confusion is God exploring mystery. Your clarity is God recognizing truth. Learning to read the secret language that God uses doesn't require special powers or years of esoteric training. It requires what you already have, the capacity to pay attention, the willingness to receive guidance, and the trust that life is more intelligent and loving than your thinking mind can comprehend. Start today. Start right now. Notice what's happening around you with fresh eyes. Ask yourself, if divine intelligence were trying to communicate something important to me through these circumstances, what might that communication be? Not what you want it to be, but what it actually seems to be saying when you listen without agenda. That person who just entered your life, what quality are they inviting you to develop? That challenge you're facing, what strength is it asking you to discover? That opportunity that just appeared, what aspect of your divine nature is it inviting you to express? Ibn-Arabi taught that when you begin to read life this way, you discover something miraculous. You have never been alone. You have never been without guidance. You have never been in a random, meaningless universe. You have always been in intimate conversation with divine intelligence. You just didn't know the language it was using. But now you do. Now you can begin to read the secret language that surrounds you every moment. Now you can start to receive the constant guidance, love, and wisdom that has been offered to you your entire life. The divine has never stopped speaking to you. The question is, now that you know the language, what will you? Here, every moment is a new word in God's love letter to you. Every day is a new page in the infinite book of divine communication. And you, your awareness, your heart, your very presence, you are both the reader and the message, both the receiver and the transmission. Welcome to the conversation that has been waiting your whole life for you to join. Welcome to the secret language that was never really secret, just waiting for you to remember how to listen. God is speaking. Now you know how to hear.